5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off!
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Showreel. Take a look at any cinema listing today and you're sure to find that at least one of those box office releases is a remake of an old movie. But to be a successful movie makeover, you'll need to dress up the remake with some big name actors, a chart-topping soundtrack, and of course the biggest and best special effects you can find.
Today's guest is no stranger to special effects. Liam Whitehouse is a special effects artist who's worked on some pretty fantastic projects, including Transformers 3. Although focused on post-production work, you'll also find Liam at the Griffith Film School, where he lectures on special effects. We're very lucky to have Liam join us in today's episode of Showreel. Welcome, Liam.
Thanks.
Hi, Liam.
How you going?
So, Liam, tell us, how did you get your start in special effects?
I basically really enjoyed Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back when I was a kid, and I wanted to make a career out of creating models and special effects for movies. So I, did art and sculpture and made some sort of miniatures when I was younger.
So when the rest of us were making paperclip holders for our dads to take to work, you were making massive special effects for Transformer type movies?
Yeah, I was learning two-point perspective.
Excellent.
So yeah, it was basically special effects is a combination of sort of science and art blended together. So visual effects is a team of scientists and a team of artists and people that know both, sort of combining those skill sets together to create all Avatar and Star Wars and Jack the Giant Slayer and all the different movies that we see on the silver screen today.
Now, just on that, it's definitely not for the technically challenged like myself. What kind of subjects do you need to do to get a start in special effects?
The best artists that were at Weta and Industrial Light and Magic would probably be people that have traditional fine arts training and computer sciences training. So that's like Python and C++ kind of computer nerding, coding, and painting, drawing, sculpture, photography, lighting, and those kinds of things.
And that has to change every year as well, because obviously we see a shift in technology with phones and computers and tablets. I can only imagine the software changes every year, so you need to be able to keep up to date with that.
Yeah, so a lot of studios write their own software, so the stuff that we're using on our tablets and on our operating systems is being developed by scientists at places like Industrial Light and Magic, and then it filters down into the general population. So a lot of stuff like Photoshop was invented in the 80s at Industrial Light and Magic, and now that's used by mums and dads today to make their kids' pimples go away.
That's pretty amazing. Now, you were lucky enough, but also I think you have to say talented enough to get yourself some spots in some really major movies, and one of those was Transformers Dark of the Moon. Tell us about how you got into that. It's pretty amazing to work on a Transformers movie.
Well, basically I was working down the Gold Coast doing architectural visualization, and I really wanted to move into a sort of feature film special effects thing. So I rented a high definition video camera, which cost me $2,000 for the weekend. And this was in 2004. And then I filmed a short video, and I did the 3D animation and sort of production for that by myself. And then I sent that video, once it was done, to Lucasfilm several years later, and they offered me a job on Transformers. So I initially didn't want to send it because I didn't want to get rejected by them, because I thought I didn't want to have the disappointment.
But you had to take a leap of faith. And
so I thought, well, if that guy you know, can have a go at sending his resume through, I should have a go as well. So that's how it happened.
Absolutely. Tell us about some of the simulations that you did specifically for that movie. When we watch it, what will we see that was yours?
So the main sequences that that one of the main simulations I worked on was the driller worm eating the building in half, and then it fell over onto another building. So we had to fill the building with all different levels of office furniture and chairs and props, and then each level at a time would slide out of the building and smash through the glass and then fall out onto the street. And that was used for that whole sequence through the movie. And
so if we're looking at a scene, say for example an action sequence that takes maybe a minute or 2 minutes on our screen, how long does that realistically take to make?
Oh yeah, so when I was working at Lucasfilm, we would basically I worked on 8 shots over the 7 months I was there. So a shot is typically can be around 48 frames long. So the trick of how movies are made is there's a lot of people doing a very small amount of animation, and they revise it hundreds of times to get to the perfect kind of level of detail and things like that.
That's amazing.
So in TV, for example, you do 1 shot a day, and then on a movie you do 1 shot a month. So you have that extra time to fine tune it and get the extra lighting detail and animation finesse into it.
Yeah. Now, of also movies that are conceptually brilliant but are just poorly executed, what kind of movies do you think need a special effects remake?
I think it'd be great to see the original Star Wars be remade that was made in the 70s.
I think we could do a much better job with new special effects.
Yeah, I think everyone was hoping for that with the prequels, but it didn't quite get there because of the crossover between miniatures to digital technology was right at that early 2000s. And I think everyone would love to see a really authentic kind of Star Wars New Hope remade by J.J. Abrams.
Liam, I felt exactly the same way about Titanic. Well, that's all we've got time for, unfortunately, but we'll be back very shortly with Bridget and Liam as we take a look at another film with tons of special effects, Jack the Giant Slayer. If you've noticed yourself having deja vu at the cinema recently, there's a very good reason for it. Chances are that you've just bought tickets to see an old classic fairy tale that's had a big budget makeover. Over the past few years, this cinematic trend has seen the return of Hansel and Gretel, Snow White, Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan and Little Red Riding Hood. And if you thought you'd seen the end of it, you don't know Jack.
Fay! Fi! Foe! You expecting someone?
The legends are true.
Prepare for battle! Fire! Ready? Jump!
Here comes the thunder.
That worked out better than I expected.
Jack the Giant Slayer. This film is...
That's right. The latest fairy tale makeover on the block is Jack and the Giant Slayer. The Jack, as it's now commonly known, was directed by Bryan Singer, also known for his work on the TV series House, X-Men, Superman Returns and The Usual Suspects. Jack also has an all-star lineup including Ewan McGregor, Stanley Tucci and the star himself, Nicholas Hoult. So what do you think of the movie?
Oh, I thought it was awful. I have to say, I thought it was absolutely awful. It is the most... Now, you know I'm a fan of a rom-com, so I was hardly placed to like this movie. It is so violent. I don't believe it's a kids' movie, although I do appreciate that there's no blood. They've been able to do biting lots of heads off and killing lots of people with no blood. But the whole premise is about Jack saving a princess. That wasn't the real story. The real story was about how Jack was poor. He went to the market, he sold his cow, he came back, he planted a seed, up grew the beanstalk, and then he had one giant. In this movie, they've taken it to the absolute extreme. He has a whole kingdom of giants and a crazy girl to find.
I mean, that makes it better though. It's so much more exciting. Like, I love these types of movies, but usually I can't sit through them. I just find them too boring. But now with all the action in, I think it's really improved things.
Liam, give us your professional opinion. Okay. Special effects?
I think that a lot of directors are falling into the trap of thinking that computer-generated animated characters are entertaining audiences and thrilling audiences with the peril of the scene. But the thing is, if you have a person running away from something that's artificial on a green screen, and then you beautifully illustrate that into a computer-generated world with a creature that's fake chasing after them, the person's going to be sitting there in the audience going, like,
and you get
bored
a
out of them.
disconnect, don't you? You get a disconnect between the actor running on the green screen and then these amazing special effects. It must be really hard for an actor to connect with that.
Yeah, well, the thing is, there's no giants in the film when they're filming it, so they have a person like myself with a 20-foot stick with a sticky tape cross on the top of it. This is the giant, run away! Look, terror, terror! And the actor's kind of just like, oh man, why did I get into this industry? And then they're like running away from the stick with the nerd holding the stick. So yeah, it's just one of those things where they may need to shift back to the kind of bolder chasing Indiana Jones, where they're using more real, like, in-camera effects so that they can give the audience real
But I mean,
drama.
for something like this, like, how do you create that when you've got a giant beanstalk, as like a slew of giants? How do you make that somewhat real?
Well, I guess the thing is, like, it really starts in the initial storyboards and concept of a film. So they need to have something that the audience can engage with and connect with as a normal person, you know, in the city that they're living in. And if it's too unrealistic and too ridiculous, and there's not enough like physical contact happening, then it won't work. So they could have studied nature to see, you know, giant human beings, what they looked like, how they moved, the speed of how they ran, and then applied that to the animation. Could have used, you know, more Lord of the Rings type in-camera giants to, you know, in-camera perspective techniques to get people, because the giants just didn't have a realistic kind of believability to them.
This is a big budget movie. This is a $195 million budget movie, and it's kind of on par budget-wise with some of the other big movies that we've seen come out lately, like Oz the Great and Powerful. They had very similar working budgets. Do you think that we've taken it too far with the special effects? Do you think we can ever go too far with special effects?
Well, I think the beautiful thing that they did with Avatar was they used real people and they used all their facial expressions and their movement, and then just copied it directly onto the characters. And even though they were 7 foot and the humans were 5'9" or 6 foot, you could really see that they were a living, breathing, believable person. And I think that side of technology is a really, you know, a really good angle to go on, whereas the keyframe animation monster movie, we've seen it so many times before since the last decade, since 2001, from, you know, The Mummy Returns, all these CGI armies of creatures and throwing plants and tree fights in Lord of the Rings. People are kind of not shocked by it or impressed by it as much these days.
Now, I was speaking to you earlier. You weren't a fan of the special effects in this movie. Do you want to tell us why?
Well, I think the giants, when you make a computer-generated character, once you've made one giant, you can then copy it a second time or a third time, make a variation on it, and then you can make an army of giants. So if they made one giant, they could easily make 20 giants for this film. So it's really just a computer efficiency thing. So the fact that you were saying there isn't one giant is now...
Right, there's a whole there's a kingdom of giants that Jack had to fight.
That doesn't actually... If they all look the same and they're very generic in their design, that's actually not hard to do for the animators, because all they do is load in a crowd of giants instead of the one that they've put the time into making, and they can duplicate them around, and that's one of the advantages of computer animation as opposed to stop motion. And possibly where we take it too far a little bit as well, perhaps. Yeah, well, I think because it's easy to do on computer, you can easily go overboard with it. And I think also that the giants were neither photoreal nor were they uniquely monstrous. So they didn't have sort of like Gollum's lifelike skin and facial sort of setup, and they weren't like, each one wasn't a uniquely terrifying beast. They just looked fairly in between somewhere. So
we've touched on the special effects and on the storyline a little bit, but just quickly before we go, what did we think of the actors? Nicholas Hoult, he was about a boy. He was a young kid and about a boy. Who'd have ever thought he'd be Jack?
Well, he's coming out as a zombie now in Warm Bodies.
That's it. Did you like the actors?
I think it was well cast. Yeah, I think it was. I think they chose the actor to play each character.
We'll have to see
really
how
well.
it goes. Well, as with any film, Jack and the Giant Slayer is sure to have its lovers and its haters. We'd love to hear what you think. Be sure to visit our Facebook page and let us know what you think. After the break, we'll take a look at the growing trend of apocalyptic movies.
So the Mayans called it, and the world in fact didn't end in 2012. But that doesn't mean you can't get your fill of apocalyptic movies to fill any kind of non-world ending void that you might have. There's countless events that could cause the end of the world, be it robots, zombies, aliens, or nuclear weapons. If Hollywood has its way, the human race will continue to be on the brink of endangerment forever.
So, end of the world movies are right up there for me with zombies, Jack, pretty much any of the movies we've been talking about today. What are your thoughts?
I think it is really funny that we've been constantly in the end of the world for the past 2,000
Haven't
years.
we? Since the 80s, we've been in the end of the world. 80s was the beginning.
Yeah.
It's coming.
Yeah.
I know. We just don't know how far away it is. But there was a funny small bit of information that that Paul wrote in one of his letters to new Christians. He said, this is 2,000 years ago. He said, it doesn't really matter if you get married or not because the end is coming so soon that it's not going to make any difference.
Look, the end of the world predictions have been around for ages. You've had Nostradamus doing it. You've had loads of people doing it. Why is it that Hollywood sort of jumps onto it and holds onto it? Because I did a little bit of research on this, and before the 1950s, there were 4 apocalyptic movies. And then you saw in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, the number started to get bigger and bigger. In the last 10 years alone, there's been 75 big make apocalyptic movies. Are we obsessed with the end of the world? Are we wanting the end of the world? Or are we simply just transferring exactly what we're doing in everyday society with the environment and war and terrorism and fighting and saying, you know what, let's make a movie about how it's all going to go down anyway. May as well.
I mean, of course, there's nothing more exciting than the idea of every man fending for themselves, you know?
It's just fueling the doomsday preppers. That's all it's doing. Now you've got this massive cult of people, these doomsday preppers that are digging bunkers underneath the ground.
Survivalists living out in the middle of Antarctica.
Buying all the John West tuna they can, just so that they're all right if it all goes to rubbish. I don't know, there's a lot of these movies coming out. That being said, there is one that I do quite like. Oh, I like a movie. Hunger Games. That was...
They are making a sequel for that too, I believe.
Yeah, I rated that.
Which makes sense because it absolutely killed it in the box office. It was something like 400 million it grossed. Production budget was around 80 million. You know, why wouldn't you make a sequel to it?
I think I liked it because it was post-apocalyptic rather than the end of the world, because you've seen all of these movies come with the big tidal waves and the craters and the meteorites and all of these things hitting the earth. But that's probably why I liked Hunger Games. Tell us about the special effects in these movies. When we see a scene like a massive wave crashing over New York and all the iconic landmarks flying down, or we see, you know, countries one by one implode, what kind of special effects does that take, and what do you think about them?
Well, basically what they do is they'll look at a lot of reference videos on YouTube of the actual apocalypse that's happening around us, and then they just use the waves coming in, the tsunamis coming in, and the buildings collapsing and things like that.
I'm sorry, they reference YouTube to find out how it's actually going to happen?
Oh no, they'll look at footage of destruction, and then they'll recreate that destruction on computer using computer simulations. So if one of the things I did was wave simulation and water simulation. So basically they'll build a little model city in front of them, and then they'll have the wave at certain settings, and then they just press play and the wave will like fire through the city automatically when the computer will run the simulation to see how the destruction takes place.
It's scary. I remember when I lived in LA and I saw an End of the World, one of those movies, and it was the city of LA. I was looking for my apartment. I was sitting in the cinema looking for my apartment thinking, right, I need to move. I need to move to the east side.
I know.
Do you think it scares people?
Well, I think when I was in San Francisco, there was a stage where there'd just been the earthquakes in Japan, and everyone in the whole city was freaked out because they thought there was going to be a second San Francisco earthquake. And I actually left because I was so terrified from this hypo sort of mass hysterical fear that was going on in 2010 about there being an earthquake over there, and there was of course no earthquake. But it's just the media and the word of mouth and everyone sort of...
I'll tell you what though, those special effects for the things like The Day After Tomorrow must be convincing, because I remember when some of the floods happened and all the pictures were being shared around Facebook. One of the hoax pictures was a grab from The Day After Tomorrow. People were sharing around.
No way.
I know.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah.
The thing is though, as scary as all of these images are, and as much as they sort of make us go, oh no, we all still run to the cinema to watch it. It's like a train wreck that you can't look away from.
Yeah.
I mean, they play on things that are relevant, really. You know, you've got, The Day After Tomorrow playing on global warming.
Yeah.
You have things like Land of the Dead where they play on capitalism, the downfall of capitalism, that kind of thing. It's all very relevant. I think that's why we are so scared, because it is relevant to our lives. So when you see things like this happening, you think, what if that happens to me? Better make a survival plan.
That's it. And then you start to see, back in like I was telling you before, in the 50s, 60s and 70s, they were already making those movies. But of course, back then they were using things like aliens and zombies and things coming from outer space to hit us. Now we've got all this bioterrorism and all of these sort of missiles and all this new technology that they say are going to end the world, and they're making movies about all those things. So who knows? They'll probably combine the Hunger Games and one of the apocalyptic movies, and it'll be every man for himself, and that's how the next movie will go.
That's kind of the thrill of it though, every man for himself, thinking out what you're going to do.
That's it. No, I don't know, it's a movie genre that keeps growing, and each year you see a couple more come out. This year we've got The Host coming out. I don't know if you've seen the preview for that, but that's another one there. And there's just no shortage of them.
I agree.
And so the highest grossing apocalyptic film that we ever saw, and like you said, it was The Hunger Games, $408 million in the box office. That's huge. When we look at some of these movies that are coming out that are $50, $60, $70 million, why is it that you think that we're infatuated with things like The Hunger Games and these kinds of movies?
I haven't seen The Hunger Games myself. I know, treason. But from what I understand, they're pitched against each other. Is that right? Isn't that kind of the thrill of it again?
It's like the state of origin.
People are sadistic. They like seeing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, maybe.
I think when I was in San Francisco, I got the impression that they were going to, at some point in the near to distant future, try and test the waters with the kind of gladiatorial, real, like kind of reality TV shows that use some level of actual real violence.
I have seen one like that. It was a social science or a science experiment. I think it was actually called The Experiment, and they took a group of scientists, and there was some carpenters and there were some academics, and they basically simulated the end of the world. And so they put them in this downtown East LA kind of area, shut them off from humanity, shut them off from electricity, water, everything, to see how long that they would survive and how ingenious they could become and how innovative they would be to try and recreate life. I think that we're quite fascinated.
How did they go?
Yeah, look, they did better than the contestants on Big Brother. Nobody killed each other, but it was really, really interesting to see them have to recreate these day-to-day mod cons that they needed to live.
So which ones do you think you're going to see coming more frequently now? I'm thinking zombies.
Oh, I think the zombies will have its day just like the vampires. What do you reckon, Liam?
I think they're going to give us more alien conspiracy movies, more zombie, man versus zombie, and more kind of survivalist, like trying to say zombies are actually people without food and without desperate people, kind of make people draw links together.
And they're going to have to up the game on the special effects too, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right.
The same thing. Well, while it's definitely not the end of the world, unfortunately, it is the end of another episode of Showreel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.